Welcome back to Newsday. U.S. President Joe Biden says the U.S. military is conducting an operation to extract its personnel from Khartoum. Biden noted that Washington is temporarily suspending operations at its embassy as fighting rocks Sudan. In a statement, Biden said he is receiving regular reports from his team on their ongoing work to assist Americans in Sudan to a possible extent and is working with allies and partners on same. Joining us to
discuss further is our special correspondent, Karl Bostic. Good to have you, Karl, here on Newsday. Now, let's get it started. Can you give us more details about the evacuation of the U.S. Embassy staff?
Yes, good afternoon. Well, things moved very, very quickly because on Monday, a U.S. Embassy convoy, unprovoked, came under attack, under fire on the streets of Khartoum on Monday. And as a result, President Biden received a recommendation from his national security advisors that plans for an evacuation should proceed immediately because there was no end in sight to the fighting. And that's why you had a team of special ops troops flying into the U.S. base in Djibouti, Camp Lemonnier, that's 800 miles away from Khartoum. They flew into Djibouti on Friday, and on Saturday, you had Chinook helicopters and a V-22 Osprey plane, a unique kind of a plane because it doesn't need a runway. It can land and take off vertically. They flew to Ethiopia for refueling, and then after sundown yesterday, Saturday, when Eid was beginning, again celebrating Eid, they spent time on the ground inside the U.S. Embassy complex, evacuating 70 embassy personnel or thereabouts, and a handful of other foreign officials. And then they were on the ground for only about an hour, or less than an hour, and flew back to Ethiopia en route to Djibouti. As the Joint Chief of Staff's official put it, the operation was fast and clean. That's exactly what happened, but it left with great uncertainty about what's to happen with those remaining Americans on the ground in Sudan.
And still talking about those citizens left behind and how other countries evacuating their diplomats and citizens, Karl.
Well, it's happening very quickly because, for example, when it comes to the U.S., you have about 16,000 U.S. citizens in Sudan, and right now the U.S. is saying they don't have the capacity to organize withdrawal. It's too dangerous. What they are doing is giving them advice on possible escape routes. Really, the only way out of Sudan, if you can't fly in, the airport is damaged. In fact, some of the heaviest fighting is at the airport. The runways are damaged. The only way out is by land, either to the port of Sudan, that's about 525 miles away. It's a 12-hour drive. It's very dangerous. Or else 600 miles to the border to Egypt. So what we already have happening in places, there's already a convoy, dozens of vehicles evacuating UN personnel, minivans, buses, and cars, and other European officials headed to Port Sudan, which is on the Red Sea. That's for that 12-mile journey. You've got a French special ops team at a military base north of Khartoum that's ready to evacuate French nationals. Altogether, there's less than 2,000 EU nationals in Sudan. Tomorrow there will be EU foreign ministers meeting, deciding about how to, coordinate evacuation of that. But already we've seen countries such as Saudi Arabia, they've already been able to successfully evacuate citizens yesterday. They went out via Port Sudan and arrived in Jeddah. Egypt, for its part, interestingly enough, where you have 10,000 Egyptian citizens in Sudan, Egypt is announcing its diplomats will not leave until they can guarantee the safe passage of even its citizens.
All right, let's try to get back to the beginning of the story. How did this fight between the two factions get started in the first place?
Well, the problem really is what transpired after the ouster of the dictator Omar al-Hassan Barif. In other words, in 2019, you had that coup ending 30 years of dictatorial, of Bashir, 30 years of dictatorial power. These two generals, even though they were rivals, they cooperated in staging this coup. You had Al-Fatah Burhan He's the de facto military leader of the Sudanese army. And you also had General Hamdan, also known as Hemeti, who has his own paramilitary group of about 70,000 strong. Together, they agreed to join forces with the civilian government back in 2019 to prepare for civilian rule. That was supposed to happen at the end of 2021. But in October, General al-Burhan decided that he didn't want to give up power. So actually together, those two generals staged a coup again. And then finally, a preliminary deal for a new civilian government under pressure from the US, the EU, the African Union. In December, they said, okay, we'll try again for a civilian rule. The problem was they could not agree on what the chain of command between these two generals are because they so deeply mistrust each other. So what happened about 9 or 10 days ago, you had General al-Burhan very suspicious of what General al-Burhan was very suspicious of Hamdan, of what he was up to, and so he quietly began moving troops into Khartoum. And then you had the other general sending troops to a base where Egyptian planes were. This is not just a local conflict. This is involving other powers as well. He was suspicious of Egyptian planes being supportive of General al-Burhan, and the pilots were temporarily detained and then released. And then that's when the fighting started. Because they could not agree to what the chain of command would be if there was a civilian government. As one person put it right now, there's been such a breakdown in the relationship, there is no path of return. This will only end with more bloodshed until someone can declare victory.
And unfortunately, Karl, the civilians are caught up between those warring sides. Now, are Sudanese also able to leave the country at this rate?
Well, it's the most dangerous thing if you're trying to leave as a Sudanese citizen. Already you have about 15,000 people in the west, mostly women and children, leaving through the Darfur region into Chad. But other Sudanese citizens, for example, trying to enter Egypt, they're finding it very difficult to leave the country because they have insufficient documents. They don't have passports. They don't have visas. So they're trapped. And also those roads are controlled by armed groups. So it really is a dire situation for the Sudanese citizens on the ground. They literally are trapped on the road and in the city, in the capital.
All right, so what are the conditions like right now in Khartoum? You know, pictures have actually shown, pictures from previous days showed smokes going up everywhere, plume of smokes going off everywhere in the capital. What's the situation right now in Khartoum?
You're talking about a city of 5 million people, densely populated. Already the scenes are being called apocalyptic. Just think of warplanes flying over your neighborhood, dropping bombs because the other military group is hiding out in your neighborhood. So it's neighborhood by neighborhood fighting. It's reports that there's been no electricity for the past 24 hours at least, no water for the past 6 days. You have medical teams that are being targeted, and there are scenes of rotting corpses, rotting bodies of youths on the street that are unattended because it's too dangerous to remove them. So it's very dangerous right now, and people are being advised to stay indoors. And just keep in mind, this is the end of Ramadan. People are supposed to be celebrating Eid. This is not the way people want to remember, Eid, celebrating it because instead they're in fear for their life.
Indeed, Karl, not a good situation to be in right now. But we've been talking about both factions, but how are other countries involved in this fighting, you think?
Well, I think you need to keep in mind that even before this war started, Sudan was always a country that was very attractive because for 30 years it was under the control of the dictator, and it was facing sanctions and isolation. And once he was removed, people saw that as an opportunity because Sudan is very rich in mineral resources and also agriculture as well. So, for example, the Russian private military company, the Wagner Group, they came in onto the scene and they arranged deals with General Hamdan Hamdan to supply arms and training in exchange for gold mining concessions in the West. So you got the Wagner Russian military group aiding General Hamdan. You had the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov visiting Sudan back in February because Russia wants to build a naval base in Port Sudan and have it finished by the end of this year, because that base is on the Red Sea. They want to base naval vessels and a nuclear powered ship. Meanwhile, Egypt, they're very, very supportive of the de facto military leader al-Burhan, because they see him as a more of a reliable partner. In fact, Egypt's al-Sisi and also Abdel al-Fattah al-Burhan in Sudan, they both went to the same school together. So there's a kind of allegiance there. Egypt does not want to see militia run by General Hamdan on its border. So Egypt is at play. And then you got the United Arab Emirates. United Arab Emirates, for example, they supported General Hamdan's group because they needed fighters, Sudanese fighters, to fight in Yemen for them. So what's happened is that General Hamdan has actually become very, very wealthy by hiring out his troops to fight in Yemen. In fact, a lot of his wealth through the gold mining contracts with the Wagner Group and with the mercenaries that he hired out to the UAE, the Emiratis in Yemen, he's got his personal wealth now stashed away in Dubai. But then you've got even countries like Israel. Israel just normalized relations with Sudan back in 2020, the Abraham Accords. And now Israel is very nervous because ultimately, for all foreign countries involved, they don't know which side to back because they are all fighting for keeps. And the last thing they want to do is to be on the wrong side of this very brutal and bloody fighting.
All right, I want to say many thanks to you, Karl Bostic, our special correspondent, for giving us updates about Sudan and all that is happening there.